I think for our friends in the Northern Hemisphere, we need to, first of all, clearly acknowledge that the climate change crisis is an industrial revolution byproduct, something that Africa has not participated in, but bearing the brunt of. So it's a legacy of colonialism that just needs a reparation approach to like fix this crisis. So while we never had mass industrialization, we are having catastrophic byproduct of it. And it's linked to everything, to immigration that Europe is suffering from. And we are a young population and they are an aging population. They need to keep that in mind. And numbers, we outnumber them very clearly. So this is something that Europeans just need to come to terms with. Americans need to get serious with this Paris Accords. It's a first world problem that developing worlds have to suffer from. So their commitment needs to be clear and involved and not superiority led. They need to be able to listen to young people from the countries that this affects the most, Asia and Africa included. And the whole models of waste being generated in Europe and America and being dealt with in Asia and Africa, that is not sustainable. While we here are working for like food security and stability and immigration because of climate change, they need to work on waste reduction, creating more energy efficient cars and transportation systems and things that cut emissions from their side of the world. And while their social responsibility on this side of the planet is to engage with young people, not with governments. Engaging with governments in Africa is futile. They're bureaucratic, they're not representative, they're not democratic, so they don't reflect the people that they're governing. It's a nation run by dictators. All of African countries are. So to bypass them and work with youth through initiatives that highlight the importance of youth, like the two ladies said, empowering of youth, engaging youth at a very small level and moving up until we get youth parliaments, until African youth are able to be in government positions. I feel the environmental change has to just, in each and every African country, has to be run by young people, NGOs that are run by young people, business models that are run by young people. It can't be the way it is right now, that they engage governments and hope that this trickles down and that it changes. It's not working, and they have to change that model. They need to engage young people where they are in the initiatives they have and support them that way if they hope for this change to engulf the whole continent. While I agree with her totally that there needs to be a reform when it comes to business and taxation and tax havens and just curbing this resource draining of Mother Earth, I think there needs to be more accountability from consumers, because business is only as profitable as you allow it to be. So if we engage consumers to be more conscious and hold companies more accountable, and before you buy a product, you make sure that the company pays livable wages, that they are not extractive, that if they are a company that relies on mining, that the mining is not done by children, that it follows international law, that they don't have taxation shells and offshore bank accounts, that the rules apply to them. We will make sure by just being a more educated consumer, a more conscious consumers. And that is definitely something that will put just very extractive capitalist system on check. Because I think asking governments to stop companies and conglomerates and these huge multinational companies to stop running tax havens, it's counterproductive, because they have super PACs that fund politicians. So that's a huge overhaul of the political system that would require, you know, asking the wolf not to eat the sheep kind of thing. Politicians need donations from companies and rich people, and those donations are attached to tax breaks for the rich. Otherwise, they won't donate to them. So a whole reform of the system needs to happen. And that can only happen by a more educated voter and a more conscious consumer. So I think our challenge and the challenge to the democratic systems of there is to have a more educated, less fascist voter and consumer to end this very I want, I need consumer culture, and for people who want to buy things to hold the companies accountable. You buy things that are ethically sourced, that wages are paid. If you know Amazon factory workers don't have bathroom breaks, don't use Amazon. That would force them to reform and vocalize, we're not buying from you because of this. So they are forced to reform their business model to be more humane, to use less packaging, to pay more to fix the environment, to extract less. And I think that's a more communal approach and a more realistic approach than asking governments to, you know, stop taking money from rich people. Yes, I agree with my co-panels. And I also think that young Africans need to be given credit for their ability to hold their leaders accountable. Because corruption is generally run by a very small circle. And that's who European companies deal with. Like if she said, if it became an open source and knowledge shared information where the issue is, who's asking for money under the table, the population will force them to come clean or remove them from the office they're in. So it's an issue of transparency. But also, Africans need to know the value of the resources. So corrupt or not, we're the only people who have these resources. If we ask you to come and make a factory here, and we refuse to sell you these things, we're just gonna not sell them to you. Where are you gonna get them from? This needs to be a power balance of a discussion. It's our resources, it's our copper, it's our gold. You make the things, you have the technology, but how are you gonna make it without our resources? Corrupt or not, if we stop the corruption here and we stop selling our resources to China that doubles the value and manufacture it and sells it to Europeans, this needs to stop. We need to clearly decide as young people in Africa that we have the resources, so we get to have the say-so. No more selling raw materials to Chinese companies. Just stop that point blank. If you want to make something that is African product, you need to bring it, teach the African factory workers, teach the African finance, build the African banks that you need this material for. Because without it, you can't have your product.
Benefit the people.
Yeah, and it's a value chain system. So you're not just making a factory, you're creating industries in universities and engineers, and there is nothing that African youth can't do. Because the brain drain from Africa that goes to Europe, that goes to America, these are African children. They're just educated over there, or they are educated in Africa and find better work out there. So there is no, even the immigration issue. People leave Africa because they can't find opportunities. They leave here with the education that they got from African schools. They finish their university in Africa and then go and apply to graduate school in Europe and work in European companies and work in European factories. So it needs to be a shift in thinking of this value of Africa for Africans kind of thing. Okay, it needs to be, if you're going to take our resources, you have to hire us. You have to do it in our country. Your standard of living depends on our resources. So you're just going to have to share it.